Back to World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Now, let's look at this economic situation. This is the time of year when many states, like Virginia here nearby, have their sales tax holidays for the back-to-school season. So if you're buying school supplies or shoes or clothing for your child or for anybody, you can get the sales tax, which is 6-7%. In many places, sometimes more, you can get that removed, and that ought to remind us of something. In all these debates about taxation, Wall Street has a holiday. Their tax holiday lasts all year. In Virginia and in recent years in the District of Columbia, it's about a 2-week period where working families don't have to pay the sales tax on back-to-school goods. Wall Street has a tax holiday that lasts all year, and it covers everything they do. Quadrillions of dollars of trading in toxic-kited derivatives, not 1 cent of sales tax. And if you've got problems in California or Illinois or New York or in the federal budget, that Tobin tax, the Wall Street sales tax, is waiting. It's got to be used. Now, the Senate has finally passed this $26 billion, it's really emergency relief for Medicaid. It's about $16 billion to maintain fundamental medical services to poor people through the states, $16 billion for a 6-month fix on Medicaid, and $10 billion to prevent teachers and other state workers from being laid off. It may get down to the level of police and firemen. We've got a couple of poor towns in the United States, small cities, that are shutting down their complete library system. No more municipal libraries. No place for working people to go to study or look at the Internet if you can't afford it. And still, Wall Street is not taxed. Now, the irony is, as the Senate comes up with $26 billion in this much delayed emergency relief measure, it turns out that one of the ways they paid for it, one of the ways they got the liberal Republicans, the Susan Collins, Olympia Snow gang up there from Maine, was to gouge the federal food stamp program, that in a couple of years, the food stamp payment, which is it's a couple of $100 a month, will go down by $60 a month for poor families in order to pay for this, because the reactionary Republicans and their Tea Party dupes have put up this big brouhaha about the federal budget deficit. The question of the Bush tax cuts, right? The food stamp recipients are going to be gouged. We've got all kinds of municipalities on the verge of bankruptcy. Police, firemen, teachers, all being laid off. And we're told that we have to have more tax cuts for the rich. This is disgusting. This is an insult to your intelligence. By the way, we did have this study a couple of weeks ago that shows that the income disparity in the United States has tripled over the past 30 years. That in 1978, under Jimmy Carter, the top 1% they received 25 times what the bottom fifth got. So if you were in the lower 20% of the U.S. population in 1978, the 1% at the top got 25 times more than you did. And now, in 2007, almost 30 years later, it's 75 times more. So we've got a 75-to-1 income disparity. And now we're told that we need to prolong tax cuts for the rich, the Bush tax cuts. And the same cretins who are babbling about the federal budget deficit crisis, Senator Kyle of Arizona, for example, is telling us that, well, tax cuts are different because tax cuts have a kind of anointed, special, sacred character about them. You don't need to cut some defense spending or something like that to pay for those tax cuts. The tax cuts have a logic all their own. Yeah, to triple the income disparity. Remember Machiavelli's definition: corruption. The concept of corruption equals the exorbitant income disparity. in a place like this. We're told, for example, that the estate tax on multi-billionaires has to be removed because it's a death tax after all, right? We got Frank Luntz and these other sophists and wordsmiths coming in on it. I would say, yeah, we want the estate tax. That's our last chance to get something out of these profiteers who have destroyed the world and U.S. economies in the 80s and the 90s, right? If you're over $10 million, you should start paying some federal estate tax, I would humbly say. Now, we're told that the reason you can't do this is because if you cut taxes, then you have the rich getting more money, and they invest in new jobs. This is an absolute myth. This has no basis in reality. Rich people in the United States today, if they have disposable income that they don't need for their yachts, like Senator Kerry of Massachusetts, who keeps his teak yacht moored in Rhode Island, they don't use that to create jobs. Here's what they do. We see what they do. They go to Goldman Sachs, and they buy derivatives. Because the rate of profit on a derivative is, if it goes well, is astronomically above what you can get out of something like, building a factory and putting in some machinery and hiring some productive labor and producing something that humanity needs for the human survival. You don't want to get into that. You want to go straight to derivatives. You want to get a collateralized debt obligation like Abacus, a super CDO with lots of other CDOs inside of it. And remember, these are not ownership. These are bets. This is pure gambling. Or you don't want to do that. You can do the yen carry trade, right? You can go, essentially, you can do the dollar carry trade. You can do the carry trade where you take your hot dollars and you take them overseas. You go to the hottest speculative market in the world and you try to make a short-term speculative killing. That's another thing you can do. So go to Goldman Sachs, or you can go to an emerging market with a carry trade transaction, or suppose you've got a factory in the U.S. already, you use your money to move it overseas and destroy those jobs here, and we can have the runaway shop and destroy the industrial base here in the United States. So this idiotic story that if rich people get more money, they will invest that and create jobs, that's exactly what has not happened. You remember the Bush tax cuts. The title of that bill, I should have looked it up. The title of the Bush tax cuts was the Job Creation Act of 2001. And, of course, it didn't work. It did nothing of the kind because that money went into collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, structured investment vehicles, options, futures, indices, and all known perverse polymorphous combinations of those. So don't believe that garbage. And, of course, there will be taxation, and the only question is who's going to pay? And the answer is Wall Street should pay. Back in a minute.